Hello there. Welcome to my YouTube channel. If you're watching this is my first attempt at making a YouTube video, so I hope you'll bear with me. What I wanted to do today was make a review of Frank Herbert's seminal science fiction novel, Dune. And the reason I wanted to make this video was because I think that, with Denis Villeneuve's new adaptation of the novel coming out later this year, a lot of people are gonna get interested in the book. I think many people are gonna consider, is this whether or not it's worth their time, and they're gonna go look to reviews on Amazon and Goodreads and YouTube and stuff. And well, here's the thing with a lot of reviews on those places. There are mostly positive reviews, and there are some negative ones as well. And the problem I see is that a ton of the positive reviews, they don't talk about any of the negatives. The people writing and writing these reviews, making these videos, all they're saying is, this is one of the greatest science fiction novels of all time. It's or one of the greatest, it's got fantastic world building and great ideas and stuff like that. And they're not talking about they're not talking about the flaws, and I really do think that Dune is a flawed book. And then you've got the negative reviews, and I don't agree with many of the criticisms made in these negative reviews, and I'll get to that later. Well, actually, I think I'll get to it now. One criticism I hear often is that Dune is slow and boring, and I will defend it on this account. I don't think the Dune is slow and boring, and I think it's quite exciting. I think that it's got many. There are so many things in Dune that really excite that part of your brain, that that younger part of your brain. I forget who said this quote, but some famous science fiction writer, it might have been Isaac Asimov, said the golden age of science fiction is 12 years old. And there's so much stuff in Dune that is going to excite your inner 12-year-old. You've got knife fights, you've got sandworms, you've got assassinations with poisoning, and you've got the voice that the Bene Gesserit use. There's all this really cool stuff in there. I don't think I really don't think that Dune is a boring book. And another common criticism is that Dune is confusing, and I also disagree with this. I don't think that Dune is very confusing when compared to science fiction books in general. I don't think that Dune really stands out as being incredibly impenetrable. I'm actually in the middle of another classic science fiction book from the 60s, Ursula K. Le Guin's The Left Hand of Darkness, and I'm like I'm about like 70 pages into that, like a fifth of the way into it. And I honestly found that to be a little harder to get into. And I'm finding it harder to get into, honestly. I mean, there's just a ton of stuff to remember in that book. Yeah, I don't find Dune to be, exceptionally difficult in terms of its, in terms of how, in terms of how much information there is to process in it. I mean, I guess if we're talking about like the themes and stuff, I guess it's gonna take some effort to like try to figure out what Frank Herbert's saying through the story. But I mean, I think many of these people who are saying that Dune is confusing, I think they mean it's confusing on a surface level, and I don't find the surface level confusing. Also, I think I should mention that, I don't think I found it not confusing because, I'm so smart or something. I think there's two reasons in particular that I didn't have that hard of a time with Dune. The first is that before I even read the book, before I read the story, I went through and read the entire glossary all at once. So when while I was reading the story and I encountered some term, I already pretty much knew what it was. I wasn't too confused. And also another thing is, before I read the book, I watched David Lynch's film, the 1984 adaptation of Dune, and that really helped me a lot. Whenever I got a little lazy with my imagination, I could just use that film as a crutch. I would honestly recommend, if you're going to read Dune, I recommend watching the 1984 film first. And I'm sure that some Dune fans would disagree. I think maybe some would say, "Yo, don't get David Lynch's vision of it in your mind. Like visualize it yourself first." But I would say, if you want to have an easier time reading Dune, yeah, watch the movie first. I mean, I think I should mention that David Lynch's film does take some like huge liberties with the book in some parts, but in others it's actually pretty darn faithful. Yeah, and there are parts in that book where he just really captures the feel of it just right. You really get the sense that this is a Greek tragedy in space with mystical elements and stuff. I really love. I'm not a huge fan of Toto's score for that movie, honestly. But I do like the track called Paul Meets Johnny, and I also like Brian Eno's Prophecy theme. That's absolutely fantastic. I love the feeling that gives to the movie. Anyway, sorry for going on a tangent there about the film. Anyway, yeah, I watched the movie first, so it wasn't that confusing. So I actually have my own criticisms. And I think I should mention that Dune is one of my favorite books. I wouldn't say that I have a single favorite book, because I haven't yet read that one book that does everything I want from a book. But there are three books that I would place on the same level as Dune. Well, no, two other books, I mean. The first is The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. That's, like, the story of that is absolutely fantastic. And the other book is The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger, and I know tons of people hate that book, but I love it because I just find Holden Caulfield to be a very relatable character. I don't know what that says about me, but yeah, that's what I'd say. Yeah, I like it a ton. But I do think that it has a ton of flaws, and I sort of wanted to go into that. And here's the thing, I would never blame anyone for not liking Dune, because I really do think that I think a large part of why I like the book has to do with when I read it. I first encountered Dune in my senior year of high school, and, I read it because, I heard it was supposedly the greatest science fiction novel of all time, which, by the way, is not a claim. In my opinion, that's not true. I mean, it's a contender, I suppose, but I wouldn't say it's the absolute best. Anyway, yeah, I read it back in high school, and that the first time I read it, I thought to myself, alright, I can respect this, but I can't say I really enjoyed it all that much. So yeah, I thought it was fine. I didn't really connect with it all that well. I didn't find any of the characters to be very, very relatable. But then, for some reason, coincidentally in my senior year of college, I just felt like reading it again. The book just beckoned to me, and I found myself like reading it again. And this time, I was really getting into it. I don't know why. I just connected with it a lot more. I understood, a lot more about what Frank Herbert was trying to say about, people's relationship with technology and environmentalism and religion and heroism and all that. I just thought the story was a bit more fun this time, and I sort of thought that, in my second reading, I found Paul to be a little more relatable. I still think that, with Paul being, the most important person in the universe, and this incredibly powerful being, it was still a bit hard for me to really relate to him. But overall, in my second reading of the book, I connected with it a lot more. But still, there are problems with it, and well, I guess I might as well just get on with it and tell you why I don't think it's absolutely perfect. The biggest reason that what I'd say is the biggest flaw of Dune is that I don't think it's plotted very well. And some Dune fans might get pretty angry at me for saying something like that, and they might say, what, but there's all this intrigue, and you've got, the story about revenge and all that, and I'm like, well, when I say it's not plotted very well, what I mean is, in a Freytag's triangle sense, and Freytag's triangle, right? You've got the introduction, and the rising action, climax, falling action, denouement, that, I think, typically, we sort of want to see something like that in, in stories that we call satisfying. And here's the thing, one of the oldest rules of storytelling, and I think, tons of people already know this, it's that the second to last act, the end of the second to last act has to end with, it's got to be the darkest moment for the protagonist. That's got to be the most difficult moment. A famous example that I think everyone knows is the end of The Empire Strikes Back. And at the end of The Empire Strikes Back, what happens? Luke finds out that Darth Vader is his father. He can't kill him. The second most evil man in the galaxy is his dad, and also Han Solo's been frozen in carbonite, and he's being taken to Jabba the Hutt's palace. All this terrible stuff happens, and then that leads the viewer to wonder, what's going to happen in the next film. And the problem with Dune is that we don't really get this satisfying act structure. Frank Herbert spends way too much time with the setup of the book, and not enough, proportionally, on the payoff. So what we have is pretty much Frank Herbert spends pretty much the first two parts, and there are three parts. The first part is called Dune, the second part is called Muad'Dib, and the third part is called The Prophet. So Dune and Muad'Dib, that is the setup. And then the third part is the payoff, and we're missing that middle section. We're missing a section in between where there's there are more intricacies and stuff that you've got characters interacting, characters from the setup being developed and stuff. That part is all missing, and I don't know why more people don't talk about this. This is a huge problem, and kind of related is the fact that halfway through the book, Paul pretty much has all the advantages on his side, and one thing I haven't done here is I haven't really given you much of a plot summary. I think that I mean, even to tell you about the setup, even to tell you that Paul, I think if you're looking up reviews of Dune, you already know. You've probably read a lot of other reviews, watched other videos and stuff, and you probably already know that the book is about how the main character, his family's in in this feud with another family. His father is killed, and he has to. He manages to escape with his mother, and he joins this native tribe. The natives of this planet who, sort of live out in in the desert and stuff. Well, I guess the planet's all desert, but not in the cities of the desert. But like, they're nomad tribes. He joins one tribe. Just telling you all that, we've covered more than half of the book. And that's really not the way it should be. Like, the first third should be the setup. The middle third should be the development and the development of the plot. The third part should be the payoff, and that's not what Frank Herbert does. In fact, halfway through the book, I think it's almost exactly halfway through the book, Paul and, well, actually no, just Paul. Paul has a test of sorts. I don't want to get specific about it. So as not to no, I don't want to spoil anything for you. Sorry, I was taking a drink of water. Let's see, where was I? Oh yeah, so Paul has a test, and so he, after he passes the test, of course. I mean, I'm not gonna spoil it for you. And then, people who've read Dune will know exactly what I'm talking about. And my question to fans of the book is, or anyone who's read it, is, what is standing in Paul's way after he passes that test? And he's essentially, he isn't yet, well, actually, no, he is pretty much fully accepted into the Fremen tribe, Fremen being the name of the desert people. And so yeah, there's really nothing standing in his way after that. He has all the advantages on his side. He has, he has the Fremen on his side, who are, even he has the weirding way of the Bene Gesserits, which is this fighting technique that is used by this sort of order of nuns, essentially, that his mother belongs to. His mom knows the weirding way, and that's a huge advantage. And even before, and so he's going to teach the Fremen the weirding way. And here's the thing: even before, okay, so the difficulty of explaining this is that I haven't explained many other things yet. So I was gonna say that even before they know the weirding way, the Fremen are already terrific warriors, and they're already handily defeating the Sardaukar, who are the best. They are the Emperor's soldiers. They are the best soldiers that everyone in the world knows of. Everyone in the known universe knows of. They're already taking good care of the Sardaukar. As we see in the scene where the Harkonnens, the rival family, when they attack, um, House Atreides, and you've got Sardaukar mixed in with Harkonnen troops, and yeah, the Fremen are already good fighters, and he's going to teach them the Weirding way, and he has the sandworms on his side, and let's not forget that he's the Kwisatz Haderach, and he can see into the future at certain times. And of course he has the secret of the spice. And one of the weird things about the book is that I guess this is more of a minor criticism, but I think I should mention that it's been like 5 years since I last read the book. But I still remember it fairly well because it's one of those books that I keep on my shelf right beside me, and I take it off once in a while, and I just flip to a random page, and I just, I just read a few pages and stuff. I mean, that's how close I am to this book. So maybe I'm sorry if I get any details wrong. Okay, I've forgotten what I was just saying just now. What was I saying? Let's see. I was saying that there was the Kwisatz Haderach. He's the Kwisatz Haderach, and he can see into the future sometimes. Oh yeah, he has the secret of the spice. And one of the things about the book that really confuses me, and this is more of a minor criticism, but why is it that, this isn't the spice is this incredibly important substance. And yet only the Fremen know about where the spice comes from. That just makes absolutely no sense. This is like the oil of, or like what oil is to our world, essentially the spices to their world. It's what makes space travel possible. And yet, like, scientists don't come and study. Don't try to find out where the spice comes from. That makes no sense to me. And so yeah, Paul has all the advantages on his side halfway through the book. Well, there is, and after that, there really isn't much he has to do. Everything sort of just, comes his way. You don't feel that Paul really has to make any sort of effort to win. Let's see. I had this other point in my head. So yeah. Well, actually, maybe not. Anyway, there is that, and I also have I also think I do have a criticism of. Another criticism I have is that Frank Herbert isn't exactly the best prose writer. Like, even if we're talking about science fiction and even if we're restricting ourselves to science fiction, I don't think Frank Herbert is all that good. From what I've seen, I think that Philip K. Dick is a better writer. I think Ursula K. Le Guin is a better writer. Alfred Bester is a better writer. By the way, there is one book I can recommend to every science fiction fan. Alfred Bester's The Stars, My Destination. If you haven't read that and you're interested in science fiction, go and read it. I think it was published in the early 60s or sometime in the 60s, and it was at least a decade ahead of its time, if not more than that. Like, man, it with the exception of a few things, like if you told me that The Stars My Destination was published this year, I would believe you. That book's fantastic. And you know, on a sentence by sentence level, Bester is definitely better than Frank Herbert. Although Frank Herbert does have some pretty good ideas, or well, interesting ideas. Maybe I might make a video in the future. I don't want to do this until I read the book again, but I do want to maybe someday like make a video more on my interpretation of Dune. But it like I said, it's been a few years since I last read it, and yeah, I think I do want to do that sometime, but I just have so much else I want to read. Sometime in the future, I do want to do that. Let's see, what else is there to say? Well, see, here's the thing. I think I'd better say some good things about Dune as well. I have focused mainly on the negatives of Dune in this video, but that's only because, tons of other people talk about the good stuff, and there is tons of good stuff. This story is Hamlet meets Oedipus meets Lawrence of Arabia in space. I mean, if you're interested in those things, then it's not too hard for me to recommend it to you. I have to say, earlier I said that Dune is not a very boring book, and I've criticized Dune's plot. But let me say that the individual scenes of Dune are pretty much all fun for me. I don't think that, a novel should should structure its scenes in such a way that, to produce an effect of, increasing danger, increasing, the obstacles for the protagonist are getting bigger, and Dune doesn't really do that. But let me just say that, yeah, the individual scenes are very fun. I can name certain scenes there's a scene that's not in the movie, the banquet scene where you've got where Duke Leto Atreides has a banquet for the important people of Arrakis, or maybe it's just the important people of Arrakeen, which is the capital city of Arrakis. I don't think I don't really remember. But anyway, you've got so all these people come, and we see that Lady Jessica, Paul's mom, is able to tell, and Paul himself, I think, they're able to tell that some of these people they've invited are working for the Harkonnens. I think that's a very brilliant scene. To sort of tie it into my criticism from earlier, though, it's none of these characters show up. It's so disappointing. You've got these characters introduced, and Frank Herbert doesn't use them later in the book. It's, with the exception of this one character named Esmar Tuek, who is a smuggler, if I remember right. Yeah. So, let's see, there's this one scene where the villain's nephew, the main villain, Baron Harkonnen, his nephew has this gladiator combat with an Atreides prisoner of war, That scene is absolutely fantastic. Um, and, well, actually, the entire end of book two is just so darn memorable. And, yeah, you know what? Ideally, if I had been Frank Herbert's editor for this book, I would have been like, let's publish book one and two as that's going to be one book. Then the next book, that's going to have a part three, the prophet. That's going to be part four, and you're going to write. I want you to write another part three between part two and the new part four, and you're going to sort of. I want you to expand on what happens during the 2 years between the two parts. But anyway, yeah, the end of part two is really fantastic. In fact, I have the book with me right here. I wanted to read the last few pages, or well, actually no, it's just the last page and a half in my copy, and the text is really huge, so it's really not that much. I wanted to read this part right here, with Paul and the love interest, Cheney, and it is pronounced Cheney. That I've heard. I think that's the way Frank Herbert has said it in interviews. Although the movie, her name is pronounced Chani, I think. So I'm gonna go with Frank Herbert's pronunciation. Anyway, I'm just gonna read it right now. He held himself poised in the awareness, seeing time stretch out in its weird dimension, delicately balanced, yet whirling, narrow yet spread like a net, gathering countless worlds and forces, a tight wire that he must walk, yet a teeter-totter on which he balanced. On one side he could see the Imperium, a Harkonnen called Fade Routha, who flashed toward him like a deadly blade. The Sardaukar raging off their planet to spread pogrom on Arrakis, the Guild conniving and plotting, the Bene Gesserit with their scheme of selective breeding. They lay massed like a thunderhead on his horizon, held back by no more than the Fremen and their Muad'Dib, the sleeping giant Fremen poised for their wild crusade across the universe. Paul felt himself at the center, at the pivot, where the whole structure turned, walking a thin wire of peace, with a measure of happiness, Johnny at his side. He could see it stretching ahead of him, a time of relative quiet, in a hidden siege, a moment of peace between periods of violence. There is no other place for peace, he said. Usul, you're crying, Johnny murmured. Usul, my strength. Do you give moisture to the dead? To who's dead? To ones not yet dead, he said. Then let them have their time of life, she said. He sensed through the drug fog how right she was, pulled her against him with savage pressure. Sehaya, he said. She put a palm against his cheek. I'm no longer afraid, Usul. Look at me. I see what you see when you hold me thus. What do you see? He demanded. I see us giving love to each other in a time of quiet between storms. It's what we were meant to do. The drug had him again. The drug had him again, and he thought, so many times you've given me comfort and forgetfulness. He felt anew the hyper-illumination with its high-relief imagery of time, sensed his future becoming memories, the tender indignities of physical love, the sharing and communion of selves, the softness and the violence. You're the strong one, Chani, he muttered. Stay with me. Always, she said, and kissed his cheek. Like, that part, that part, I always get goosebumps when I read that part, and I mean, and I do think in Frank Herbert, I said earlier his prose isn't that great, but he does have certain parts where I think he does get good, and this is one of them, and yeah, it's like the end of the second part just leads you to expect so much more from the ending than is actually given. Yeah, that's that part's fantastic, and I'd feel bad if anyone, if I stopped anyone from reading Dune who might actually really enjoy it, but I do think it's important to talk about the negatives, even if we're, even if it's classic books that we're talking about. The important thing for me is I think that people should know what they're getting into. As a fan of Dune, as someone who really does like Dune, let me just say that I'm not going to blame anyone for not liking it. And also, I recommend reading what I think is one of the best reviews of Dune out there. It was written by a science fiction writer and critic named, I think his name is pronounced Algis Budrys. That's Algis. Last name Budrys. Go read his review. It's fantastic, and let me just point out, the vocabulary he uses in his review is well, it's pretty. It's the sort of vocabulary you'd see in maybe a New York article. Not, I don't think you wouldn't see, such high level diction used in a science fiction magazine today. Go read his review. It's absolutely fantastic. He and this will be a big consolation to people who don't really find themselves liking Dune, because if you find yourself all alone and just know that a very respected science fiction critic sort of agrees, sort of thought that, he thought the book had its flaws too. He praises its world building, but then, he sort of points out some problems I had with the book as well. I actually have the review right here. Here's a line that really does explain my problem pretty succinctly. What he says here is Herbert was juggling too many people, too many subplots. Clearly, too, he had made the reader too many promises he was not able to keep. That's the thing. Anyway, he had made the reader too many promises he was not able to keep when it came time to pay off whatever his original plan. I totally agree with that. Oh, and here's another, here's another, good quote here. But if you think, that the reason Dune turns flat and tails off at the end is because even 400 pages cannot encompass it properly, please consider instead the possibility that 200 pages would have sufficed, even for an epic. The Odyssey is not that long, nor Beowulf, nor the narrative of the New Testament. That's a fantastic line right there. I mean, how many long books do you see this you know, in today's world, and you're like, this could be, you're just padding it out. You know, this could be so much shorter. So yeah, go read that review. I'm gonna put a link in the description to it. Let's see. Is there anything else I wanted to say? Excuse me. Oh, I wanted to make another recommendation, and I wanted to recommend a book that one other of my favorite books, The Count of Monte Cristo, because that was I actually read that book shortly before I read Dune, and it was sort of one of the reasons why the first reading of Dune, I was I was a little disappointed with the book, because and this is the reason I'm recommending it. Its strength, its primary strength is Dune's weakness, and its weakness is, I think, Dune's strength, because I think that in terms of theme, I don't think that The Count of Monte Cristo is a very deep book. It tries to say something about the nature of revenge, and at the end, I wouldn't dream of spoiling that book for you. That's something that, I don't want to take that pleasure away from you. But anyway, it's just not a very deep book. Whereas I think Frank Herbert, I think Dune is a fairly deep book that juggles, a ton of themes. Like, Frank Herbert tried to make it about so many things all at once. And, but its strength, the Count of Monte Cristo's strength, is that it's a really well told story. I think actually I think that the Count of Monte Cristo might not also be very good in the Freytag's triangle sense, but it's got what Dune doesn't, and that's like an incredibly intricate like web of connections between its characters. Like there's this one character who's like, an enemy of the Count, and he has a child out of wedlock with this woman who becomes the wife of this other enemy of the Count, Edmond Dantes, the main character. And then they have the kid when he's born. He's gonna create a scandal if people know that he exists. So what they do is they try to kill him by burying him alive. But then this other character who becomes important in the story later, he rescues the kid. He buries him, he digs him up out of the ground, and he rescues him, and then that character becomes the baby grows up and becomes an important character too. And there's so much stuff like that. It's truly a breathtaking novel. If you don't want to read The Count of Monte Cristo, if you don't have the time to read a book that's as long as The Lord of the Rings, and I will admit that one problem with The Count of Monte Cristo is that it is too long. I don't mind if a book is long and it deserves to be long, but the thing is that while he was writing The Count of Monte Cristo, Alexandre Dumas was paid by the word, so there's so much. There are times when he takes like 50 words to say what could be said in like 10 or 15, and it's and The Count of I thought of an analogy. That The Count of Monte Cristo is like a sandwich that's too big, and it's not big because it's got too many slices of stuff. It's that everything is it's got a reasonable amount of slices of vegetables and cheese and meat and stuff. The problem is that each slice is cut a bit too thickly, and that's the problem with it. But man, if you can get past the first half, the second half is, I mean, Alexander Dumas like spent the first half just, and this is the way it should be. He has everything, like he sets up the dominoes and then he knocks them all over, and it's absolutely fantastic. And man, it's, yeah, true. Anyway, what I was saying was, if you don't have, the book is as long as The Lord of the Rings. If you don't want to read a book that's as long as The Lord of the Rings, get the Spark Notes or the Cliffs Notes, or read some online summary or something, because I actually bought the Spark Notes of The Count of Monte Cristo, and and I was having fun just reading the summary. Like, seriously, go. You have to read it. Like, maybe I haven't read any of the abridged versions. There are some abridged versions in print. I think Bantam Classics has one, and I think Barnes and Nobles has their own abridged version. I haven't read them. I'm sure they might be good. I'm not sure. The point is, I totally recommend it if you don't mind that it's a bit too long. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, yeah. Now, how do I connect that back to Dune? Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, so, yeah, if, yeah, make sure you read and watch more reviews of Dune. Like, if someone's telling you that Dune is, like, the greatest thing ever, and I think it's really great, but if someone's telling you it's the greatest thing ever and it doesn't have any flaws at all, don't listen to them. It's like, there are many valid reasons not to like it. It's a giant science fiction classic. It's a monument of the genre. So it's definitely worth a try, but don't feel in any sense that you've got some obligation to read it or anything. Yeah. So yeah, those are my thoughts. I'd really like to someday read Dune and make another video, like, more in depth about its themes and stuff. I really have to do that someday, and maybe its sequels. I've actually never finished Frank Herbert's series, which is 6 books. I've read each of the first 5 books twice, but the 6th, Chapter House Dune, I lose the thread somewhere. I've started reading that book 3 or 4 times, and each time I think I just lost the thread. It's like, where is this going? Like, the fate of the human race is literally what's at stake in Chapter House Dune, and I'm bored as hell. I know it's like, the last time I tried it, I made it a quarter of the way through, and I just had to put it aside because I was like, well, what's going on, Frank Herbert? Well, let me just say that I do really like the first 4 books. I like the 3 sequels. The first three sequels, Dune Messiah, Children of Dune, and God Emperor of Dune. In fact, I think that Children of Dune may very well be Frank Herbert. It may very well be the best written of Frank Herbert's Dune books. Although of the first four, it's probably my least favorite. If I had to rank them so far, I would say I would put Dune at the top. Then I would actually say God Emperor of Dune, and that's a very polarizing book. There are many people who think that it's absolutely awful. Even people who like Frank Herbert's other Dune books, they will say that it is pretty bad. And I guess I kind of see where they're coming from. I think it's a very self-indulgent book, because Frank Herbert, he succumbs to the temptation that I'm sure that many popular writers succumb to of just having a character as a stand-in, just expressing his views about the world and stuff. But I personally like it. Sometimes I find it more fun. In some parts, I actually found it more fun and interesting than the first one. But I just it feels wrong to reward a book that's so self-indulgent, and then I'd put Dune Messiah in the number 3 spot, and then I'd say that then goes Children of Dune, and then Heretics of Dune, which I think is just readable. I just couldn't get that interested in it, and really it's sort of like the Dune series for me is sort of like it's sort of like being, on a tour bus where, in the first 4 books, let's say, we're seeing all these interesting things, like the guide is pointing out all these interesting sites, and then in Heretics of Dune, let's say the driver is sort of veering off the interesting path, and then by Chapter House Dune, I'm sort of like a driver. Where are we going? All the interesting stuff was back there. So yeah, that's that's sort of my thought. That's kind of what I think about the Dune series overall. I really have to. I want to read Chapter House Dune, but I don't think I could do it without reading the entire series all the way through again. I mean, if it were any other series, and if there weren't just one, I wouldn't feel that sense of obligation. But this is Dune we're talking about, and, there's just one. It's not like Frank Herbert wrote. If Frank Herbert had written 15 or 20 Dune books, I would have been like, okay, I Heretics, that's it. I'm out. If other people like it, they can. But because he wrote just one, it would be kind of a shame not to just leave that one unread. So I do want to read it. So yeah, that's my thought. Those are my thoughts on the Dune series overall. Yeah, if I'd really like to hear from if anyone's even watching this, and first of all, if anyone's watching this, I'd like to thank you for spending an hour listening to this. I really didn't mean for it to be anywhere this long. I see. I'm looking at the timer here. It says, oh, we're already at 59 minutes and 19 seconds. Oh, that's crazy. But anyway, thank you for watching. And if you've read the book, I'd really like to hear what your thoughts on the book are. If you haven't, and you're sort of interested in reading it, if you're considering whether or not you should read it, sort of weighing the pros and cons, I'd really like to hear if I've made you more interested, less interested. So yeah, just I'd really like to hear your thoughts. Thank you, and bye for now.